Welcome to the Public Works Podcast, the show where we talk about infrastructure, development, policy, and the people helping to shape our communities. I'm your host for today's episode, Shane Silsby. In this interview, we're talking about economic development and something that doesn't always make headlines, but makes most economic development possible. That's infrastructure. From water and transportation to utilities and long-term capacity planning, infrastructure is the foundation that allows cities to grow, attract jobs, and compete against other markets. Our guest today is a longtime colleague, Eric Johnson from the City of Phoenix Community and Economic Development Department. Phoenix is one of the fastest growing cities in the country, and Eric brings a front row perspective on how infrastructure capacity, smart planning, and interdepartmental coordination help directly drive economic opportunity. We'll cover Eric's journey, the critical role public works plays in economic development, and how Phoenix's infrastructure systems and strategies have supported its ongoing growth for multiple decades. We'll even review a 3D model of downtown Phoenix to highlight some of the key development initiatives that Eric has worked on in his career, and a few that I got to work on as well. Let's get into this special episode of the Public Works Podcast on location in downtown Phoenix, Arizona, at City Hall. Thanks. Welcome back to the Public Works Podcast, the show where we talk about infrastructure, policy, in this case, economic growth, and how all those might intersect and what local governments are doing to help in all of those areas. I'm your host for today's episode, Shane Silsby. Today's episode is a very special one with one of my former colleagues, Eric Johnson from the City of Phoenix Community and Economic Development Department. For anyone who cares about how cities operate, how they grow, and we are in a growth area in Phoenix, Arizona, they need to tune into this episode and share it with their friends. We are going to dive deep into Eric's background and ask him some key questions about how economic development works. If you don't know, Phoenix is one of the fastest growing cities in the country, or at least it continues to be one of the fastest growing, and that growth does not happen by accident. It takes infrastructure, which we'll talk about, it takes pre-planning, it takes partnerships, and it takes investment from the private sector. That's all powered through the efforts of people like Eric and what the community expects in the fifth largest city and a large metro area. Eric, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Shane. It's a pleasure to be joining you.
Appreciate you being here, taking your time. Eric's had a long day, and now we're jumping into recording an episode, so we appreciate that. I'd like to start with your journey, especially in public service. You are in a leadership position. It doesn't happen in a week or 2 weeks. It happens through many iterations of what goes on in local governments. So for you, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about your background. Obviously, we want to hear about how you ended up in your position in economic development, but where did you start? How did you end up in Phoenix, at the City of Phoenix? What interested you in local government, and then how you ended up here, and then your journey from that point?
Well, I'm from Chicago, Illinois, and I was born there and went to school in Illinois and got a degree in urban and regional planning, which kind of started me on the path of early on economic development. It was all focused on the zoning and site development of projects, so I got that early bachelor's degree. Then moved to Colorado and got the chance to work in several different construction industries and move into being a code enforcement officer and a village planner. And so that planning then led to several years of experience. And that led me to going back to get a master's in public administration because I really enjoyed working in the public field and having the opportunity to work on community development and see the opportunities of what change could be implemented through the planning efforts. After getting a master's in public administration, then I moved down to Arizona, and I've worked for a couple of municipalities here, but I've been with Phoenix now for 22 years. And I started with the Development Services Department, working as a site planner, doing a lot of development during one of our big growth phases in the early 2000s, from where we met. And got to learn a lot about traffic and infrastructure. But in working through the development process, as the city started to slim down, I got a lot of opportunities to experience other parts of our organization. And luckily, Phoenix being the fifth largest city in the country, there's a lot of different departments that are involved in our development process. And I moved over to our Office of Customer Advocacy to assist with small business development and how they got through our permitting processes. That actually led to an opportunity to work on our light rail program. We were opening up light rail in the early mid 2000s, and it opened in 2008. And as part of being a transit-oriented light rail, we call it transit-oriented community development now. And part of that TOD effort, though, led me into downtown development. And I joined what was called our downtown development office, focused on rebuilding and revitalizing the Phoenix core. And that led then to working with universities, major infrastructure projects, working on advancing bioscience and healthcare, entertainment districts in downtown, our convention center expansion, and lots of other exciting projects. And then I was able to get promoted to a deputy director in the department. And that ended up opening up an opportunity to move to more of a management services role and get to experience all the other elements of the department. So now I'm in my leadership position as assistant director. I've had the opportunity to work with our workforce development team, our international relations teams, business development, and then all of the support services that really make the machine run, information technology, HR, budget, all those fun internal management services items.
Yeah, and then you end up in your role now.
That is correct.
Yeah, as the assistant director.
It's both an entertaining and sometimes frustrating job of making sure the machine runs. But I think the best part of being in this executive leadership role is being able to still work on the detail of projects, but also being involved in all those policy and strategic vision conversations. Phoenix is very complex. We have a lot of great departments, and all the growth that happens is due to all the departments working together. And I think at the assistant director role, you really get to help shape what's going on. Obviously, our director and our council members and our deputy city managers and assistant city managers are all making those important calls. But as assistant directors, you're really at that front line of that transition.
Yeah, framing up the issues. Yeah. So that's a great career summary. You know what you're doing, bottom line. And the city's lucky to have you trying to figure all this out with your experience, both on the planning side, development reviews, and now looking at economic development. And it's kind of fun here. We're at your offices here at City Hall in downtown Phoenix, Arizona. One of the things I think was interesting as we were journeying through our careers here is there was a great expansion to Phoenix. I mean, it's been expanding for years, but during the pre-recession boom, really expanded out. But at the same time, there was a focus to go back to the center and focus on development also in the downtown, right? You mentioned the downtown development office. And that really was because this is where you could get a lot of density, high rises, the sports facilities, the government centers, and businesses. And we have a little model here with us that demonstrates some of the things downtown. If you know what downtown Phoenix looks like, this is a representative of that. And what I think was fun about it when I pulled it out is you and I kind of worked on the projects, you know, in this area right in here, right? And then where we sit today, we are
Right over there.
right over here. We're here, and then you and I worked on here.
Yep.
And you were talking about light rail, which is kind of on these streets.
Yep.
There's a convention center, there's the baseball stadium.
Yep.
And the basketball arena is kind of in the back there. So kind of fun to go down memory lane and looking at the model and all those projects that happened during that time.
Not everything's digital.
Not everything's
No,
digital. You can touch it.
We still go old school.
Yeah. That's all about economic opportunity, which comes through economic development. But on this Public Works podcast, we'd like to also focus on infrastructure. So can you think about, as you went through your career, when you realized, okay, this is an important thing, economic development, but infrastructure is a huge component of that. Can you think about that, or when you had that realization?
I would say infrastructure has always been a key part of development. You need to have those baseline critical utilities and infrastructure available for growth to happen. The number one thing that we hear from the developers and the site selectors when we're trying to attract a new business is how fast can you get someone in the market? What are those resources in energy and power and water, and how can we get all those utilities to and from the site? And those sites that we already have worked with, our water services department, our public works department, our street transportation department, our public transit department when some people need the transportation options, or aviation's been a critical partner of us as well. We're one of those few cities in the country that actually have an aviation department within the city as opposed to being a separate authority. But we've got a lot of great partners, and obviously infrastructure in the end costs a lot of money. Phoenix has been blessed by a lot of great leaders, mayor and council led initiatives to support general obligation bond programs, to support capital improvement programs and budgets that have been really focused on how can we build great infrastructure and connect those vital lifelines to then create the opportunity for our new growth. In the end, infrastructure is really one of those first two or three key talking points. The other two that always come up are what is the workforce? And so that's one of those big areas that Phoenix has had great success in recent years, is how do we continue to develop our workforce and not only attract it, but keep those that are graduating from our universities here to actually work in those companies. Two is it's being a business friendly environment. Phoenix is very pro development. We want to see growth. Every project has challenges to get through, but Phoenix recognizes that growth creates new jobs, new investment that increases the tax base, that helps increase revenues for the city and for the community at both the local, county, and state level. So those projects, while they may be local, are regional and statewide impacts. To more specifically answer your question, early on, I'd say it was actually being a site planner is where I really learned the importance of infrastructure, seeing the connectivity between how the zoning works and what the community vision was, down to looking at that two-dimensional layout and then how you fit everything within that box of that development. But then those were all impacted by how do you retain the water, how do you access the traffic, where do the sidewalks, your connectivity works, and then matching all those things together with the more beautification side of landscaping and signage. The fun part of Phoenix is that all those things go through our planning and development department. All those departments work together. And so being able to learn all of that early on and see how they all connect with water and sewer and the fiber and our other utilities and the street transportation network, that was my great experience about learning those all together at that one time.
Yeah, good point. My next question was about maybe an opinion folks might have. So a lot of people might think economic development's just giving away incentives, making deals, doing ribbon cuttings. And of course that can happen, but from your perspective, you probably think it's a little deeper than that. And you just outlined infrastructure is key, have a business-friendly environment, understanding the process is key, the workforce is key. But based on your background and the shaping that happened as you went through this, anything else you wanted to add about what else economic development is besides those?
Well, economic development is different to different communities, I think. That's the unique thing. And Phoenix is such a large city. We have everything from Greenfield, undisturbed desert, down to urban vertical construction. We have farm fields, we have former orchards, we've got historic preservation, we have Native American sites. I mean, we have a little bit of everything in Phoenix. The interesting thing is the challenge for our development process and economic development is there's different needs for every kinds of project, and finding the match between the needs of a business, what site they need to have, what workforce they need to have, and then finding out how all those kind of layer together to create the perfect project and the perfect location. The other big thing that I haven't touched on is speed to market, and that's one thing that's a challenge for all government agencies. There's so many environmental, legal, other obstacles that kind of come up in the development process that when it comes back to getting a successful economic development project, if you can get speed, you can get those utilities and infrastructure, and you can be a partner and an advocate working with the business development project and the developers, that helps really move projects much more quickly along the way and makes it successful. The sexy side of economic development is, yes, the ribbon cuttings, going on the trade missions, getting to go visit places, it's topping out ceremonies, all those kind of fun things. But a lot of economic development is doing the research. It's crunching the data. It's looking at, working with our sister departments to look at traffic and impact analysis to see how is that going to impact that region, that neighborhood. Is it going to impact the neighboring businesses, that kind of stuff? If we support one project, how does that impact the water or sewer capacity of other projects? Or if we're looking to do a major road improvement in one part of town, that might delay something in another part of town. A lot of the grunt work of economic development is actually having those internal conversations and doing that research, and that's probably like 2/3 of the process. And then the other third is all those community meetings, neighborhood meetings, council meetings, subcommittee meetings, zoning meetings, and then you get the fun stuff at the end.
And some promotion. I don't know if you want to share some of the stickers you guys are promoting now.
Phoenix is hot. We love marketing and branding in Phoenix. We want to promote our investinphoenix.com, our website, to try to point people there if you're looking for sites. So that's a tough thing for a lifelong government employee, is marketing and promoting things is often a challenge for local government because that's not something we normally do.
Right.
That's been one of those exciting things I've learned along my path, is working with some great marketing, graphic design professionals and communications people, and working with them to figure out how do we connect to the resources and assets such as great contractors and people to help us promote the city and also help get our message out. Government does a lot of great things, and a lot of people don't hear the great things. They usually, unfortunately, hear the not so great things. Yeah. But there are a lot of great things that are going on. We always need to be better on how do we tell that story.
Sure. Yeah. The news is normally not filled with all the great things the city is doing. Yeah. Getting into a little bit more on the technical side, Eric, let's talk about infrastructure. You highlighted many elements of it, but from your perspective, why is it so critical to successful economic development? And you mentioned many of the connectors, but let's just say two examples. One is you've got a greenfield development, you're out on the outskirts of the city, somebody buys land, they want to develop it. There's nothing there though. So maybe that example. And the other one is, yes, you're in downtown, you have a lot of existing infrastructure, but everything is 1 or 2 stories, and then you want to go 25 stories.
Yes.
So can you just talk about how infrastructure interplays into all those to the extent you're interested in that?
Certainly, those are two definitely extreme examples, but they're things that are near and dear to me. I'd say the one thing that probably many of you have heard about, if you haven't, I'm shocked because it's been in the national headlines, is Phoenix successful attraction of TSMC, the semiconductor manufacturing plant. It's a massive project, $165 billion, one of the biggest, if not the biggest in the nation of capital investment all in one site. But that is out in a greenfield area, out in a part of town that we had not originally thought was going to happen right away. It wasn't just a city thing. We were partnering with the state, with our Commerce Authority, with our Greater Phoenix Economic Council. It was a team effort for all of us to bring that project on a traction level because you needed cooperation at the state and county and local level to get it through. You're talking about stormwater permits, infrastructure, tax policy, all those items. But to be specific to the infrastructure, as soon as we knew that something of that importance that brought not only investment and jobs, but it was a national priority, we knew that project would be decades long in growth and opportunity. The city did a great job of pivoting to how can we adjust our capital improvement programs and how can we start looking at how to build and complement what they were doing and then magnify that to help mitigate impacts in that part of town and build the roads, build the water, build the sewer. And there's still issues we're working through because it's still a relatively new project. It's in a very new part of town up in North Phoenix. But that's one of those examples where it caused the city as a whole to make policy and funding changes to deal with that infrastructure need. That took a lot of council meetings, support of our council and city management of all the departments. And so a lot of that's collaboration. It's having good communication amongst the departments.
Trying to get alignment, right, so that people can understand maybe a bigger picture, or near term it's going to be tough, but long term hopefully we think it works. And when you talk about Greenfield or the kind of on the outskirts, see if we can do this here. So we are like on the map, right? We're like right in there. So follow you. And then this development is like all the way up off the map, probably 25 miles north of downtown.
30, I think. Yeah.
30 miles north of downtown. So you got to get infrastructure. Right? There's a network, but you got to push even beyond that. So yeah, big effort.
On the flip side of that is, as you mentioned earlier, we've been really proud with the political policy and kind of social focus of revitalizing our urban core. Mm-hmm. And that creates a whole different kind of set of challenges for everyone in our city. All the departments working together to certain kinds of infrastructure, like we have the road network is the road network. So maybe we're not changing the roads, but what it's underneath really becomes more the challenge. We might have a suburban style water line there that needs to be upgraded from 8 inches or 6 inches to 12 or larger. You're right. The policy and the political choices that were made in the case of Phoenix back in 2004 to try to focus on downtown vertical growth to get that density there meant that we as a city and with the development community had to focus on how do we upgrade all that existing much older infrastructure from the early 1900s and potentially earlier in other parts. But how do you upgrade all that infrastructure to facilitate the growth of that new demand and density? The good story with that, though, is it's actually a little bit even easier story to tell because investment in that infrastructure serves so many more people per capita so that if you are spending that dollar for that $1 million for doing that whatever improvement, you're serving hundreds or thousands of people rather than just 50 or 100 people. And when you're talking with your budget people and you're going for the bonding capacity, it's much easier to tell that story of how that return is to the city because it's not then just more speculative of growth. It's, hey, if we do this, you're building that infrastructure to support not only growth now, but the future growth.
Right. And in a downtown like we have here, just doing one block can service multiple projects over a long period of time. And one might argue you would have to replace those lines at some point anyway, right? Maybe not to the size, but
they become obsolete.
So you're going to have to do something. So you might as well tear up the roads, get it done at once. So. That's great.
And honestly, that becomes a partnership between the city and developers. Developers will take
Mm.
up on certain portions of that, and then we will, as the city, put that into our capital improvement plan. Back in the early 2000s, we partnered with Arizona State University and had a great partnership where economic development, city council approved us to go out and acquire a lot of land, and then we worked with our permitting and our streets and our water departments to build out a lot of the infrastructure to help build the ASU campus downtown. Building out and planning all that, then built that infrastructure that then allowed the rest of the campus to continue to build today.
Right. Yeah, it's the foundation, the backbone. When cities or other entities compete for jobs, investments from a commercial standpoint, or retail and talent workforce, how much does that infrastructure, its capacity, play into that? And then the reliability factor of the processing through the city. You talked about first to market, you talked about need for infrastructure, but in your experience, you've done a lot of negotiations and agreements. Okay, it could be Phoenix, it could be somewhere else. So are those like in the top 5, top 10? What do you think?
I would say they're in the top 5. Depending on the company, they have different priorities,
Sure,
of
good
course.
point.
I would say that infrastructure is always in the top 5. You've got
Okay.
infrastructure, you've got energy and resources, you've got workforce, you've got permitting costs, cost of living is usually in there, and amenities. But infrastructure is always in the top 5. And Phoenix has been blessed. We're a very young city. A lot of our infrastructure is pretty good. It's not, we don't have a lot of obsolete infrastructure, and our weather patterns, we avoid a lot of harm that a lot of natural disasters potentially could cause.
Not a lot of downtime in the construction seasons, if you will.
Yes, coming from the Midwest, Midwesterners, there's 2 seasons, right? There's winter and then construction season.
That's right.
Here, we have pretty good weather year round, which is great for a lot of businesses and construction. You can pretty much build year round here. There's some temperature differentials in the summertime a little bit, but changing the time when you work, man. That infrastructure is in the top 5, and it is often, especially with certain kinds of, like if you're talking manufacturing and if production companies, it's access to the water, access to power. Luckily, Phoenix has some great partners in SRP and APS for power providing. They're very reliable. Our power grid rarely goes down. And so the partnership between private and public utilities is critical for the success. Our water planning has been spectacular here in Phoenix for 100 years. We've been doing a great job. The city has been so proactive on planning that even when there's been challenges in other communities in Arizona, we've been able to rely upon that success in planning of our water department to make sure that we're able to continue our growth and expand even when other communities haven't been able to do the same thing.
Good point. That answers a little bit of this next question. Phoenix has experienced tremendous growth over the last few decades. What I was interested in, the direct linkage between that growth and the availability, quality, and capacity of the infrastructure, water, transportation, utilities, broadband. So you talked about all that. Anything you wanted to add? You said water planning is a key to that. You said relationships with the energy providers is key to that. Anything else you think maybe Phoenix does a little bit differently that allows it to be so effective at growth versus other cities on the infrastructure side?
I think probably one of our best success is the great communication between our council and our city organization. We have a city manager form of government, and that is unique for some people, but pretty common out west. And the city manager form of government allows us to take that policy decision from council and actually move very quickly into implementation through our department director and the department leads. Once you have that clear policy direction and you're able to implement those things, we're able to pivot as an organization. Every organization, government organization, takes a little bit of time to move and change. But I think one of the best successes of Phoenix is that when we need to adapt and do something creative for a solution, this city has found both the organizational and the political support to make those changes to make a project happen or to solve a problem that we're facing.
So perhaps one of the differentiators is alignment between the elected officials based on a strong planning and zoning foundation, and then implementation of those principles, if you will, and those standards and codes through the development process. And if the private sector and investors can then rely on that, then they might say, well, it might be a tie or whatever between another city, but if we have predictability, both on speed to market and the cost of that, and the knowledge that, okay, we're going to get through it if we follow the rules, maybe that's a tiebreaker, maybe Phoenix wins in some of those.
Absolutely. That is how it plays out. Our biggest probably challenge, which is not an infrastructure thing, but it's just a funding thing, is a lot of states have less restrictive state statutes that govern how we can do economic development. I'll use it right here, but we try never to use the word incentive because that's a issue in Arizona of how state law works. but we do try to find ways to shrink financial gaps, to find assistance tools that help mitigate challenges to projects. One of our reasons why we're able to win a lot of projects, though, is that one thing we do very well, though, is build infrastructure and build that capacity for growth.
Mm-hmm. Well, anything else that's unique about the state law provisions or lack of regulations that you all use in community economic development that's interesting?
I've never really actually heard anyone say lack of regulations, but I think there's kind of a blessing to being such a young state. A lot of other states have kind of been through so many growth curves that Arizona, being a younger state, is kind of learning certain things, and we're adapting to things. One of the things we did right during the beginning of the recession was we started looking at adopting some code changes for like zoning issues, like form-based codes, to try to find something that we'd seen in other communities and adapt some of those policies to making development be a little more flexible, and that we allow development to build within a broader box of allowance, but then we still have to meet all those the public safety requirements and the connectivity and utility connections, but we make it a little more flexible with that form-based code. We've tried to be as proactive on looking of best practices from other communities and adapt those.
So that's great. My other thought on that was, you mentioned proactive, and a lot of what I work with public agencies about or on is getting ready before that big thing happens. Are there other proactive measures that you all work on? And I'm thinking maybe state land negotiation or things like that. You're working on it all the time so that it's not just magic. That thing happened. It's like years of efforts that go in and a proactive nature. Anything like that?
Absolutely. And that would be a good example. Working with our state land partners, the city had a lot of departments that kind of touch on that. Obviously, street transportation and our water services and our planning department and economic development and our city management meets regularly with our state land department to work with both the state's need to develop the income that they need through the state land department. They've got a pretty singular purpose to generate revenue for our education system, and so they can maximize the returns on their land sales. But for us, it's also how can we place that properly in sequence for the growth in our more rural areas. Ideally, it's where we have our infrastructure built, and it's where we see the growth moving rather than just taking a random location. Those conversations are ongoing, and those relationships have been built so early on that those partnerships are where we've really succeeded in building great plans to then promote that growth when the opportunity arises.
Okay, so when a big initiative like a semiconductor plant needs hundreds of acres, you go, well, we have a plan for that, generally speaking. Yeah.
Or we have the relationship. And honestly, economic development really often comes down to those relationships. In the case of the TSMC site, we had always known growth was going to happen up in that area, just not as early as it has now. And so it was accelerating conversations with all the people that we already know, but how do we move that first process forward, both between agencies, the state, the county, and our own internal agencies, but also starting to have those community conversations, because community impact is obviously very important, and we want to make sure that the people both understand the importance of the project, but how it can help support the city and the growth.
Understood. And you mentioned relationships, so some of those are external relationships, but this question I have now is about internal relationships. You're a department that is leveraging a lot of resources for the city, but you may not control or operate. Those are other infrastructure departments, but you have to work kind of in tandem and maybe out of sequence for what that department wants to do versus the vision of a growth perspective. So how does that work for you as those things come up? It's not perfect. You're making sausage. How does that work at Phoenix to deal with all the departments that provide infrastructure?
And it's both structured and unstructured would be the sausage answer. And we try to be proactive on working on scheduled meetings. We meet monthly, if not biweekly, on a lot of groups. There's groups that are focused on the state land. There's groups focused on permitting and other challenges. But we have certain work groups that are set up. So we try to meet and have those collaborations in a more structured way when we can. Unfortunately, life and development, you never know when a project's going to be knocking on your door for that next great opportunity. The ability for Phoenix to pivot comes down to those communication. And honestly, that starts with our city leadership. Through the leadership of our city management team, we're able to pull together departments that may be going in slightly different directions. And economic development's job is to help paint the long-term outcome. What are those positives, and what are the opportunities? We rely on the technical departments to give us, what are the challenges? What does it take, and how does that have real impact? How do we merge all those things together to give our policy our policy team and our elected officials the right information to make the proper choice on whether or not to support one thing over another.
Yeah, good point. I can envision, the semiconductor facility is a big one, and then you've adjusted course and tried to figure out planning and implementation for that. But if Apple came in on Monday and said, hey, we want to do a big facility here, then you go, well, we have to figure this out again, right? There's got to be a little bit of empathy, maybe a little bit of sympathy for the role that you all play in trying to keep the city growing in ways that bring those exciting projects in, while trying to say, understand, creates a pressure, but hopefully that pressure in the long run will be better for everybody, right? That's kind of the goal.
We know that private or public sector, not every project is a success, nor does every project actually follow through. One of our biggest priorities is how do we create the pipeline for opportunity? And yes, there is often consternation or conflict between us and the technical departments providing those infrastructures and those support roles for those projects. The challenge is we know that you need to have that pipeline there to ride out the ups and downs of the economic turns. Phoenix was significantly impacted by the Great Recession, just like everyone. A little bit of an interesting outcome of that was our delayed recovery, though, helped lead us into a very prolonged growth period now. Right. While I think the coastal communities had a more quick turnaround on coming out of the Great Recession, our growth, though, was a little bit later, which kind of helped us ride then through part of the pandemic impact. In the economic development role, our job is to be pushing more projects than we can probably handle. In the end, it all comes down to money. We want every project to happen if we could, but we also know that not every project will happen. It's our job to help vet those out and try to weed out the ones that have a higher chance than the lower chance. And hopefully we are pushing the best opportunities for the city. And then those come back in. We work with our planning and development, our street transportation, our water services, and all the technical departments to see what those impacts and those costs are, and then that becomes the policy decision in question for council to decide how do we use the resources available and how do we support which projects.
So maybe not trying to be speculative, although there's some of that involved. So I'll give you a chance here. For public works leaders or infrastructure departments, what do you wish that they better understood and about how their work, right, directly impacts economic development outcomes, but also the reasons why you have to ask them to be creative and all of that. So a little empathy. Let's develop some empathy. Yeah. I'm not asking you to say you're sorry because you're not. You got a job to do. But what do you wish they understood more? That you understand about their plight.
I will admit that the plight is that we are constantly asking questions of like, hey, could we do this? Hey, can we do that? And I know from being in the technical department that means you got to go back, you got to crunch the numbers, you got to confirm things. If you're talking about water, you've got a certain capacity that you've got to commit, and more sewer capacity, how much can flow. And we understand that those are finite resources, and you can't just put extra in. The system fails, and that means the project will fail. I think the two things I would say is don't have too much angst with your economic development teams when it comes to how many opportunities we're looking, because we know that not every project will happen. If we've got more opportunity, that means more jobs, that means more investment in the community, which means more employment within your community, which means more spending and then tax revenue, and then that comes back into the city as resources to then spend on other projects. So our goal is to try to make sure that investment cycle and that employment cycle is continuing to grow the net wealth and value of a community. And it's hard to think about that when you're going, oh my goodness, this is going to create restrictions on this resource or limitations here or there. The other thing that I would say is it's asking the technical departments to maybe creating like a bucket of, we've got this room of flexibility versus this commitment. And lots of times we have things that are very structured. And I'd say the city's been really good about finding like, hey, we can either do this or that. In other communities I've worked in, there's been a challenge where it's like, nope, we've made this commitment, we're not going to change it. And the ability to either find a new solution to something like, oh, we could create a reliever, or we could do an upsize in this one location, and that creates another set of capacity. It's finding options is really the challenge. I think that's the biggest thing we always ask of our infrastructure departments is, what are the options? We don't want to put anyone in a pass-fail kind of situation. We want to say, well, there's this option or that option, and then we let the elected to represent our community make the choice of which path do they want to take with the community.
Okay, great. So there you have it. So infrastructure departments, your economic development folks, they understand more than you think. Maybe they just have a job to do. And you have a department, but some cities might only have one person.
Yeah.
So take it easy on them a little bit, perhaps. So that's all kind of like past, present. Now looking ahead, as Phoenix continues to grow, what infrastructure or economic challenges or opportunities do you see on the horizon?
Wow. I think everyone across the country is feeling the same challenge with power
Power
and energy, whether you're talking about solar or wind or nuclear or natural gas or whatever the solution is. We've got great providers here, but the change of technology and those demands that certain things such as data centers. And it's not just in Phoenix that we're having this conversation. I hear about it when I'm going to conferences all across the country. This is not just a city problem. This is a regional and a national problem, right? Our network, how do we deliver that power? How can we move it from A to B? And how do we meet those needs of our future growth? A separate side of this energy side is to complement something like where Phoenix has been so strategic on water planning. I believe that Phoenix is using approximately the same level of water consumption that we did in the 1950s on average per capita. Even though we've grown so much, grown so far, the conversion of a lot of land that was in agricultural and other kinds of industrial uses into residential, multifamily, and the wide variety of retail and business uses that we're using now, and all the sustainability functions we've done, the reuse and the gray water usages, and all those creative solutions that our water department has used to try to make water be either recycled or reused or last longer, those have allowed us to grow without actually really using higher demand. And I know a lot of other communities are really creative with those solutions. It's everywhere, right? I remember reading about things in the Midwest of aquifer challenges, but I think that's the other big thing is water. And water will always be a conversation. Luckily, Phoenix has done some excellent effort with strategic planning. We're able to continue to grow while some areas might not because of all that long-term work that's been done by our fellow departments.
There you go. More empathy from your friends in community economic development.
We appreciate that. Creates our opportunity.
So now two kind of more, I guess, philosophical or high level questions. If you could give one piece of advice or just whatever advice you think professionals that might be interested in public sector leadership or public sector service or economic development, what would you tell them? A little bit of advice.
Well, I'd say the way that I've come up has been very much on the hands-on part of government service. And government provides services in so many areas, from human services to senior services to convention centers and airports. For me personally, being in that development realm of being a planner, a business assistance person, being in economic development, my personal satisfaction has come to seeing the change that I work on. I will admit economic development sometimes take time. Some of the projects that you see a little bit behind you have taken a decade to work on, but seeing something that was a underutilized vacant parking lot become a $500 million mixed use project is feeling that value and seeing that change gives that reward to all the meetings, all the grinding, all the contracts, all those things that kind of go with the not fun part of work. I think for me, the reward is if you like to be a part of that change and you like to make that change in your community in whatever way that would be, is public service is a great way to do it. And I'm a big fan of local government. I think that's where a lot of the real responsiveness is. And I'm not going to say you don't find that at the county or the state or the national level, but you see your local legislators in the shopping malls and in the grocery store. You see them on the street and you have those conversations. I see residents that I've known for years, and so I get to talk to them about a problem, and honestly, I get to help solve that problem often, and it's fun to be very tangible in the change in your community.
Oh, that's great. And as we wrap up here, what's something happening in Phoenix that they should be paying attention to that they don't know about just because they're not right here?
I'd say one of the common misperceptions is what I've already mentioned earlier. Honestly, it's how well we've done planning and using water here. Everyone perceives Phoenix as being in a desert and having water challenges, and there are challenges, but we've done such a great job engineering, planning, preserving, and finding creative solutions to our water usage. In the economic realm, communities don't always think of Phoenix and go, oh, hey, I could move and relocate there. And then we have to do an education effort to try to explain that's the one resource that a lot of people don't perceive in a desert area and is actually something that we have available to us and we're not running out of. I'd say that's the big story that people often don't know about Phoenix is we actually have done a great job of planning our water out and we do actually have water.
We got it figured out. That's great. Okay, as we wrap up, I'm going to try to do something we don't normally do, and that's move the camera and try to do a close-up on this interesting model here, because Eric and I worked on some of these fun projects, and then Eric took on after that and worked on some other stuff. Just want to take that opportunity to get your opinion on what you remember, point out some new projects, things interesting to you, and then we'll see if we can get this figured out.
North would be to the bottom of your image there, and south is unfortunately the top.
So
But down here on this corner, that is the southeast side of the downtown core in our Chase Field. Some of the exciting things we did that's infrastructure related is really in this central core area. And what Shane and I worked on historically was the two buildings that are over here far on that side, and that's called the Cityscape Project. And it was adaptive reuse of a former park site of the city and then a vacant parking lot. And we were able to work with how do we modify the right-of-way, how do we help activate the street frontages to create more ground level activation, how do we do a little bit of narrowing of those street areas. Right now we've got light rail on them too. That's been a success. That came in after we actually worked on the project, light rail coming through. But then the success of that urban density, and that was some of the first mixed-use high-rise projects for almost 20 years in downtown. And then that rolled into what we call Block 23. It's another combination of mixed-use buildings and a downtown grocery store. And then that success rolled into additional high-rise multifamily residential towers in downtown. We've had almost 10,000 new residents in downtown over the last decade, and a lot of the new vertical urban growth has happened there. But circulation and underground utilities are a big key to all those success, and being able to work on how do you get the water, how do you get the sewer in and out, and then how do you move people? Where are those access points? How wide do your streets need to be? How do you deal with pedestrians and bicycles and all those other potential conflict zones? But that planning is the fun part.
Just for a little orientation, we talked about the new stuff. People might be able to see the baseball stadium and figure that out, but then the basketball arena there.
Here we got Mortgage Matchup Arena. They just recently changed the name, but that's the historic home for the Phoenix Suns. They've been there for almost 20 some odd years there. And then our convention center, this is our south building site. That's actually going to be the location of a future redevelopment site. It's vintage 1970s. And then here are the newer buildings. They are built in the 2006-2008 time period, our north and east building, our convention center. So we're very excited to have had those built and are doing a great job there.
All right, so there you go. As we wrap up, just wanted to thank you for being on the show today. And it's been a fantastic conversation. Appreciate your insights into infrastructure, which is maybe not always something that an economic development professional would know a lot about, but because of your career, you've worked with those departments and those colleagues to understand that more. And Phoenix is a growing city, so it's very important what you're doing. So we thank Eric for being on the show, and we appreciate you all for watching this episode of the Public Works Podcast. Share it with a friend, share it with your infrastructure colleagues who work with people in economic development to say they know what's going on. We got to figure it out. Until next time, I've been your host, Shane Silsby. Keep supporting those public servants that do their best every day to improve our communities and look forward to helping us make sure we have sustainable futures. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Appreciate it. That wraps up today's conversation with Eric Johnson from the City of Phoenix Community and Economic Development Department. This was a special episode for me as I worked for the City of Phoenix for about 9 years in multiple departments, and much of that time was spent working on some of the downtown and citywide developments that we discussed in this episode. I really appreciated Eric's insights on how infrastructure capacity, including water, transportation, utilities, and long-term planning, directly shape a city's ability to grow, compete for developments, and create opportunities. It's a powerful reminder that economic development doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's built on the foundation of strategy and expertise from multiple departments, with public works professionals providing expertise every single day. I hope that we didn't make you a little dizzy as we tried to move the camera around and get a close-up view of the downtown Phoenix developments, but it was an opportunity I didn't want to miss. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the Public Works Podcast on YouTube, share it with a colleague, leave us a review. Also, please follow the Public Works Podcast on LinkedIn, as that's where we promote most of the content. Those actions help us reach more people with this content to better understand the background on why infrastructure matters and why this work is so important to our communities. You can find more episodes wherever you get your podcasts, and you can learn more about our guests and additional topics at the website www.thepublicworkspodcast.com. Again, I've been your host, Shane Silsby, for today's episode. Thank you for listening, and we hope to see you next time. Take care. All right. Here we are.
Joseph here, Public Works Podcast.
Shane here as well.
All right, so you just watched some cool content. All we need from you is to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. It helps us get the message out. It helps us propagate the gospel of public works. So if you have free time, which you probably have 2 or 3 seconds, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button so more people can follow us.
That's right. All we're trying to do is highlight the public works industry.
That's it.
Make those professionals trying to improve your communities look good and raise awareness and credibility of public works.
Yes.
It's easy to do.
So once again, thanks for watching. If you have any content ideas, if you have any questions, please put them in the comments, and Shane or I will answer them within a week of you putting it in there, and we'll get you the answer that you need.
Thank you very much.